Hello everyone and welcome to the Henchman's Memoirs. This week on our Encounter Design series, we are going to be talking about how to spruce up the final fight against Strahd in your Curse of Strahd campaign. So this is a encounter design that I actually used in my campaign. I was actually running the house on Griffin Hill. I tuned this up for 5th edition, but the encounter with Strahd is more or less interchangeable between that, and you can use everything I'm going to talk about here in your Curse of Strahd campaign. So the first thing to do is you can rig the Tarot deck reading to decide where the final fight with Strahd is going to be, and we are going to set it on the top of the tallest tower there in Castle Ravenloft. Okay, I think it's the most dramatic setting for the final fight, and that's what I used. So we're gonna have a huge titanic storm pummeling the castle during our final confrontation, right? And the party comes up this staircase and they get out onto the highest floor of this tallest tower, right? And so we've got our party. We've got Rudolph Van Richten. We've got Leibniz, our witch hunter. Of course, we've got Esmeralda, and then yours truly, the henchman carrying all the extra gear, is bringing up the rear, coming up these steps. And these 4 towers represent sort of the pillars that are holding up the roof of the tower itself, right? So the party comes out here and they can see, all of this is open, so they can see out across the castle, and they see the storm and the rain and thunder and lightning and wind and all this stuff, and it's this big dramatic scene. And the way that I was running it for the house on Griffin Hill, actually the coffin of Strahd is up here, and there's some dirt packed around it and stuff. Long story, would make this video too long to go into all of that, but the party emerges up here, and when they do, we've already got these vampire spawn, right? The 3 brides of Strahd are kind of on these pillars, and they're kind of up here in the rafters a little bit. I mean, they've got spider climb, so they're kind of up here in the rafters. And then an additional difficulty was, in my iteration, they actually had a prisoner, and she was kind of like in a cage hanging off the edge of the tower with this rope, that they could cut and send her falling to her death. You don't need to add that complication. Put this where you can see it. You don't need to add that complication to your version, but it's worth noting that that's what was happening in my final fight. So the party gets up here, they roll for initiative. Strahd can either push the lid of this off and come out, or I kind of had him form out of the mist, right here. And we roll for initiative, and we're going to spice this encounter up, as we do all our encounters, with time pressure, with dynamic terrain, and with a twist on the monster. You don't have to use all 3. You can pick and choose. The fight is a lot if you're going to use all 3, but if you've been spending a year and a half building up to this, playing Curse of Strahd, you might want to make this fight a lot and make it kind of memorable. So when we roll initiative, we're going to include, in our initiative order, our environmental effect. We're going to include our villain action, which I always have going off on count 20. I usually have the environmental effect going off on count 10. And then we also are going to roll separate initiative for the vampire spawn, because we're going to be using that for part of our time pressure. So first of all, let's talk about the twist. When it comes to the twist to the monster's abilities, the kind of gimmick for the monster, it's just an embarrassment of riches when it comes to Strahd. So first of all, if we have Flee Mortals or Where Evil Lives, the same monster stats are reprinted in both. They have these really great lair actions for Strahd to replace the lair actions that are there in the core book of Curse of Strahd. Here he can have Children of the Night, where a swarm of bats or insects kind of circle around him, and so he's heavily obscured. He can have a blood rain. He chooses a point within 60 feet of him. Blood rains down in a cylinder, and a creature who isn't undead takes a d10 of necrotic damage. Obey My Desire, he can basically make somebody who doesn't make a DC 18 wisdom saving throw attack a nearby ally, something like that. And then they've also got their own version of Strahd in here with his own sort of special abilities. So here they've got villain actions for him. The first round, he causes blood to explode in a 20-foot sphere, and creatures who aren't undead have to make a saving throw or they're blood-stained until his next turn. He has advantage on attack rolls. They have disadvantage on attacks against him. Then in the second round, this is kind of cool, he and everything he's wearing turns into a large dragon of fire. He ends any grappling effects on him, and he flies around, not provoking attacks of opportunity, and anybody he passes through needs to make a DC 20 dexterity saving throw or take 8d8 fire damage. And then at the end of this action, at the end of this movement, he just turns back into himself anywhere in the battlefield he wants to. Mist of Blades, he fills an area within 60 feet of him with swirling blades. He can teleport up to 4 times into any unoccupied space and make one attack after each teleport. The mist dissipates. So again, he kind of spits out this mist everywhere in the battlefield and basically flies around in there and attacks everybody and then ends it. As if that weren't enough, in home field advantage, they also have some cool lair actions / villain actions for vampires. One I especially like is for the vampire spellcaster. They focus the dark energies that surround it, and when he hits a creature with his bite, the creature immediately expends its highest level unexpended spell slot, and Strahd regains an expended spell slot of his choice of equal or lower level. So that's kind of a cool ability. You can have any of those go off during the villain action turn each round. And again, this is separate from Strahd's turn. I would go ahead and drop his legendary actions, which compared to the cool things we just went over are pretty lame, and just clog up the game. So get rid of his legendary actions, give him villain actions, and use either those lair actions or whatever on his turn. Okay, so the next thing we have to have is some sort of terrain, some sort of dynamic terrain, something that's happening. So I have, like I said, probably at initiative count 10, environmental effect. When the environmental effect goes off, I drop a d4 on the table, and whatever it comes up, so if it comes up a 1, there's a flash of lightning so close to the tower that everybody has to make a DC 13 reflex save or be blinded until initiative count 10 of the next round. You can say maybe the undead are immune to that, but in any case, the party has to deal with potentially being blinded. The second, if I roll a 2 on this d4, there's a gust of wind. Like this really strong gale force wind sweeps across the tower top. I roll the d4 again, 1, 2, 3, 4, to determine which direction it's going. You need to make, let's say, a strength saving throw, DC 13 maybe. And if you fail, you kind of fall prone in the square next to you in the direction that the wind was blowing, right? And if you fail by 5 or more, you actually travel 10 feet and fall prone in that square. So, you know, if the henchman himself is over here and the wind blows this way and he fails, he might land in this square, or if he fails badly enough, I wouldn't have him just automatically fall off the tower for failing that save, but he's like hanging on to the edge, right, with one hand, and the wind is whipping him around, and maybe he needs help getting out, or he needs to make a strength check to kind of pull himself up, or kind of be stranded there until somebody comes and helps him. So if I roll a 3 on the environmental effect roll, then some of the rafters and beams and some of the masonry work up here falls down and threatens a random character, right? So Van Richten is over here. Maybe if it's the 4 of them, I roll a d4 to see who is threatened by this. They need to make a reflex saving throw or take 3d8 damage, something like that. Just a little something. But if I roll a 4, what I have happening in the environmental effect is the thunder sort of shakes the tower so violently, right? The wind and the thunder and everything. One of these parapets actually collapses and just falls off, and the roof part above is just swept away into the wind. If there's anybody on this, they're going to need to make a saving throw to try to jump over here. Maybe if it's a monster or something, we'll just let them fall, off the thing. But I really want to do this to kind of create this sense of this climactic battle, right? When one of these falls, I would describe the party looks out and they see like one of the other towers collapsing. They see the tower that had the heart in it collapsing into the cathedral or whatever. And this sense that the whole world is coming to an end is basically what we're trying to get across, right? So if I roll a 4, it may not affect the party that one of these buttresses kind of collapses and part of the roof is blown off, but it's going to reinforce this sense that we're in this epic battle. So the last thing to talk about is the time pressure. So on the minion's turn, every round, when the minion initiative comes around, I'm going to let Strahd use a variant of the Children of the Night ability. And again, I'm going to roll a d4 on the minion's turn. And if I roll a 1, a couple swarms of vampire bats show up. The job of these guys is not to fight the party, right? That's kind of lame. But they can swarm around one of the PCs. They can get over by Esmeralda here, and now all of her ranged attacks, right? If she's using her flintlock against Strahd, all of her ranged attacks have disadvantage on targets beyond 5 feet because these things are flying around her face or so forth. That is, or you could do it with a spellcaster. They could get over here next to Van Richten and be flying around in his face and providing partial cover for Strahd against his ranged spell attack rolls, something like that. If I roll a 2 on the Children of the Night, I'm going to have a giant dire bat show up. Again, this guy's job is not to fight the party. The party is way too high level for him to be a significant combatant. But what he can do, I'm going to let him make a grapple attempt against whoever's closest to the edge, right? And his job is to try to pull the character again off the edge and have them either hanging by one hand or they've got to use feather fall or something where they get pulled off the edge by this giant vampire bat when he shows up. If I roll a 3 on the Children of the Night roll, I'm going to have a couple of these ghouls or ghasts come up over the edge of the tower, right? They're crawling up through the storm, and they come up over here next to my witch hunter. Again, they're not at this level a serious threat, but if they have that stench ability or if they have the paralysis ability, there's a chance they could get lucky and paralyze one of the PCs for a round. There's a chance they could get lucky and give them the poisoned condition where they have disadvantage for a round. It's just, it's again, to kind of create this sense of there are more and more sort of annoyances and like extra things on the fight that are kind of distracting your attention. If I roll a 4, I'm going to have a specter come up like through the floor and attack somebody, who's maybe staying back from the fight. And they are going to attack, but their kind of gimmick is they have this life drain ability where it takes away from your maximum hit points. But also, with their intangibility, they can kind of appear anywhere and get somebody who thought they were safe and kind of menace them, in addition to everything else that's happening. And all of this, the whole thing with the Children of the Night being sort of the timer for this fight. Sometimes when you're facing a solo like Strahd, especially if the fight is going like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 rounds, those later rounds, the party definitely has an idea, okay, we're gonna win this fight, okay? Well, one of us has been down to 0 hit points, but we had a major heal ability and we got that person back up, and, we can tell he's getting down in hit points. We're gonna win this fight. And sort of the tension level starts to deflate as the fight sort of crawls towards its inevitable ending. The time pressure here is designed to make the fight feel like there are still new threats and multiple things to be worrying about, even as Strahd is clearly on his last legs. So I'm putting more and more Pathfinder pawns on the table. There's more and more different sort of conditions and things that people have to worry about. And so that keeps the fight sort of hectic and high tension, even as Strahd is getting down onto his last legs. So this is my basic idea of how to amp up the Strahd fight. I am going to share one last secret with you guys. Hopefully none of the players are listening by this point. This is sort of a DM's secret that I'm going to share. So when you get to a fight like this, that is the last epic confrontation between your party and the big bad of the campaign, there's a lot of pressure on you as the DM to tune this so that it is an excellent, exciting fight without it being without it being unbeatable, but also you don't want the big final fight to kind of end with a whimper, right? So here's what the henchman suggests you do as sort of your backup in situations like this. Strahd could be a multi-phase fight. Doesn't have to be, but he could be. So what you're going to do is you're going to plan for a second stage to this boss fight, just like in a video game. But you're not necessarily going to use it. You're not going to tune the whole fight based on there being a second stage. You're going to try to tune the fight for this, right? But on the night of the big battle, if they won initiative and they've been getting some lucky rolls and Strahd has been getting some unlucky rolls, I roll in the open. I don't believe in fudging the monster's hit points or anything like that. But for a fight of this much gravitas, I think it's okay to have a second form for Strahd in your back pocket. So you get to the end of the fight, it's been kind of a wah-wah fight. When Strahd gets stabbed through the chest with the sun sword and he falls back and he's like, and he's falling to the ground and he's sort of turning into this desiccated sort of pile of dust, more or less. You're going to describe how instead of just dying outright, his body seems to start to transform. And under his regal robes, you start to see him sort of morphing and stretching and sort of hulking out. And then he bursts out of his armor and bursts out of his fancy outfit in the form of this sort of man-bat creature, right? I got this off of Etsy, but if you don't have one, you can just use your giant bat counter. But you want to describe him as sort of this almost like were-bat hybrid as he emerges, right? Now he's got a new health bar, and we've got to finish this fight. There's this extra little oomph of the fight. So what you're going to do, you can use the stats for like an adult black dragon for this final form of Strahd. You're going to want to cut its hit points in about half because you're not trying to make this like an entirely new fight that is CR equivalent to the party. but you want to use the adult stats because you want it to still be able to do decent damage and threaten the party. You just don't want this stage to go on as long as this stage did. So you give it about half the hit points. You describe the acid breath of the dragon as being he's, puking out necrotic blood, this black blood that sticks to you and does acidic damage, or you can change it to necrotic damage. He can have the wing buffet attacks, he can have the bite attacks, everything that the black dragon has. And during this stage of the fight, now we're kind of moving towards the absolute ending, right? So you're going to drop the Children of the Night ability. You're not going to have him using these villain actions. This second stage, if you have to use it at all, is just going to be a straight slugfest where he's just trying to take as many of these players down with him as he can. And so he's just dealing damage and just trying to finish the party off in his last gasp. Then when they kill this form, he turns into mist. He goes in here, and the party needs to open his coffin and put a stake in his chest to end the whole campaign. So that's how I suggest tuning up the Curse of Strahd fight. You can use any combination of the timer, the terrain effect, and the twists on Strahd's abilities to really make this a memorable fight. Thanks, and join us next time for the Henchman's Memoirs.